This is a History of Western Thought, Episode 6 on Anaxagoras. In previous discussions that we've had so far, there are basically two questions that we have been trying to interact with as we've been looking at the pre-socratic philosophers. One is the question of the one and the many. How is it there is unity in the world as well as diversity of things that we experience? And the second is the ideas of change and permanence. How do we have change in the world while also having consistency in the world? And as we've seen, there are multiple answers by different philosophers that they have given to these questions. And in particular, the main question that has been dealt with in the last couple programs is that question of change and permanence. Whereas Heraclitus argued that the world was essentially change and reality was always in a process of flux, Parmenides and Zeno and others argued that there really is no change at all, that it is merely an illusion. In the last program, we looked at Empedocles, who tried to make a kind of solution, a way to understand both the positions of these philosophers, to say that there is both flux in the world and constant change in some sense, but there is also a sense of permanence. Now, with Anaxagoras, we get a second solution to these problems. He is a contemporary of Empedocles, born about 500 BC. Now, Anaxagoras actually got into some trouble throughout his life. He ended up being accused of impiety, and the reason was because he denied that there was anything spiritual or supernatural about the moon, saying that it was made of earth. Of course, we know today that Anaxagoras was more correct than not in arguing that way. And because of that, he was forced to leave his hometown of Athens. Now, it might be surprising that Anaxagoras is actually the first philosopher to be connected to Athens, the city that we know probably most often as the city of the philosophers, the capital of Western culture as it developed in ancient Greece. But Anaxagoras does not actually establish his school in Athens because of the trouble that he got into there. So he goes to Lampsakos, where he develops a school and started teaching his various ideas. So what were Anaxagoras' ideas and contributions to ancient Greek philosophy? Now, there are some similarities with his views and those of Empedocles, and there is some discussion and debate as to who was responding to who, but they were somehow interacting with each other. And their ideas were very much in sync on certain points and not in sync in other points. So one of the main issues that Anaxagoras was trying to deal with was this reality of permanence in the world, because he thought that Parmenides and Zeno and others made a pretty strong case that there was consistency and constancy in the world, and that change was in some sense an illusion. Now, the way that Empedocles argued for this was that there was something that was unchanging underneath all the change that we see in the world, and he argued that that was the four elements. Now, Anaxagoras agrees that there is something unchanging that is the most basic fundamental thing, an element of reality. But he doesn't argue that there is any one thing, such as fire, as earlier philosophers may have argued. And he doesn't argue that this is only the four elements. Instead, he says that there are these kinds of seeds or germs that make up all things. So there are these small particles, these basic elements that make up all of reality. But these are not all identical. This is going to be different from the atomists who come after this. He argues that in everything that exists, there is a germ or a seed of everything else that exists. Now, this might seem like a very strange idea. And what in the world is Anaxagoras talking about? Is it the case that that bone and blood are in my breakfast cereal that I eat in the morning in some sense? Anaxagoras seems to essentially say, yes, that is true. Now, it seems odd, and we might ask the question, how does he come to this conclusion? Well, he argues from the example of hair. He says, how does hair come from something that is not hair? Hair goes out of the head is made of flesh and is not made of hair. So how does hair come out of something that is not hair? And essentially, he says that the only way that it can do this is if there is, in fact, a small particle of hair within the head that is not hair. So this is how things that grow out of things that are unlike them are able to come, because there is a seed of everything in everything. Everything is intermixed with everything to some degree. Now, the more seeds there are of one thing than another in a certain object make that object what it is. So in bone, there is more seed of bone than there is of hair or of food or whatever else it might be. But what this results in for him is a way of arguing that there is permanence and stability in the world that is unchanging. And like Empedocles, he argues then that motion or change is the result of the mixture of the elements, as well as separation of these various elements from one another, though he does have a more holistic view of reality than simply limiting it to 4 distinctive elements, as Empedocles does. Now, this leaves him with the same question that Empedocles had to answer, and that is, what is the cause of all of this mixture as well as separation in the world? If the basic element of reality is these small little elements, whatever way we want to describe them, that are unchanging, what can make those unchanging things mix and separate from one another? Now, the answer that Empedocles gave was that the forces are of love and strive for love and hate, but that really was problematic for Anaxagoras. And he argued for something else, and this is the most significant aspect of Anaxagoras' philosophy that really now serves as a strong development, a positive development in philosophy that is going to lead to other ideas and figures such as Socrates and Plato. And that is that he introduces something else into the equation of reality, and that is mind. And he argues that there is this nous, or mind, that controls these things, that starts the rotation of the various elements of the world, that begins this process of mixture and separation. So the cause of change in the world is some kind of mind. Now, of course, later this will be known as a divine mind, or God, as we think of him. But Anaxagoras doesn't quite get there all the way. Now, Socrates, in his life, is influenced by Anaxagoras, or at least so we're told, and that he's influenced by this idea of mind, and he wants to work this out. A philosophy that is not purely material, dealing with the natural elements of the world, but that sees intellect or mind as something supreme. However, Socrates, after reading more of Anaxagoras, is a little bit disappointed with the way that he goes, because he hasn't quite spoken of mind as something immaterial. He speaks of this divine mind as something that is the thinnest of all things, but it still occupies space. And so he's not thinking in immaterial or idealist terms, not just yet. But what's important is that he introduces this very important theme into philosophy, that something outside of the universe, something that is a mind, even a divine mind or intelligence, must be involved in what goes on in this material world. And that is going to lead us to further philosophers as we continue this series. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for further episodes. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.